This is Backwoods Teacher, Reconstruction Part 2. Alright, on today's episode, we're going to take a look at all the things we forgot to put in the last video, namely how Reconstruction falls apart and how it fails in its duty. Here is a political cartoon of Andrew Johnson as the biblical figure Samson, bringing down Washington, D.C. with his bad handling of Reconstruction. The cartoon in front of you here shows a southern freedman and a southern white male. As you can see, neither are depicted in a very positive manner. This is typical of cartoons of this time. They were derogatory in all directions. So one of the things it's going to bring down Reconstruction is the overall negative attitude towards the whole thing. No one wanted to spend money to fix up the South, and no one wanted to spend money to help the freedmen. Okay, speaking of the freedmen, there were some efforts namely by the radical Republicans, to create something called the Freedmen's Bureau. And these were essentially schools and hospitals or healthcare centers kind of combined. They provided literacy classes and skills training and, as I said, healthcare for both the freedmen and poor whites. These were items and skills that were very terribly needed at the time. Some effort also went into creating public works. These were government projects to rebuild things like bridges and roads and buildings and such. Okay, the Freedmen's Bureau was basically attacked by the press, and if you look at this cartoon closely, you could see the obvious negative depiction of the freedmen. In the background, it shows the white workers laboring away while the freedmen's laying there getting money and doing nothing. It's a gross distortion of what the Freedmen's Bureau was all about. There are some numbers back here showing how much the Negro troops were allegedly paid compared to white veterans, and it's all pretty distorted. Okay, the South was divided into the following social structure, if you will. At the top, you had the planters, and they were the ones that controlled the wealth. They held political office and all the economic power. Beneath them are land-owning whites who had some economic power and wanted to maintain that position and didn't want to lose it. Beneath them were poor whites who were always struggling to break out of their economic situation, and at the bottom were the freedmen. The thing that kept all of this together was a sense of place, of always not wanting to lose your place and not wanting to fall behind in this pyramid type of social structure. And anyone that went along with Reconstruction was called a scalawag. That's one of the terms you were supposed to know. Okay, the radical Republicans, we've talked about them last time, but they were the ones that tried to protect the rights of the freedmen the most. They pressured Lincoln and Johnson to put more laws into Reconstruction, such as the Wade-Davis bill. They were essentially against reconciliation with the South. To summarize them, they had mostly good and some bad. The radical Republicans were the ones that did the most to help the freedmen in terms of the Washington politicians, that is. They were essentially the only ones looking out for them. The problem with them was that their desire to punish the South would have prevented the country's economy from rebounding. Because they wanted to put such strict measures on the South, it probably would have damaged things. Okay, let's take a look at this. Before the Civil War, you had, in the antebellum South, you had, the typical Scarlett O'Hara and the plantation life and Scarlett would have her dashing husband, handsome planter guy over here. Okay, then what happened is after the war, the economy is destroyed, and Scarlett's plantation life is no longer very nice. And her husband comes back from the war. If he does come back from the war, and he's going to look, a little different. He's going to be a little messed up from the war, and he might look like Kid Rock over here without makeup. On top of that, the labor force is gone that they were used to. So she would have to run things by herself, for example, and suddenly all these workers appear, and she has to do something with these workers. She can't, force them to work, but she has to get the crops in. She doesn't want to lose the property, so they strike a deal. And this deal didn't have to be such a bad thing, but in the long run, it is. What they do is they create a new system for social and economic control in the South. Reconstruction begins with an idea of 40 acres and a mule. It's a nice idea, and it probably would have solved a lot of things had they put it into place. The idea was that white landowners' property, the biggest plantations, would be divided. Some of the radical Republicans wanted to take all the white property and turn it over. Others wanted to take just the largest plantations and divide it up. Their idea was to take the head of the oldest or the eldest or the most reliable of the freedmen and give them that property, give them 40 acres and a mule, basically give them the means to start their own economic independence. The problem was how to determine who the recipients were, and seizing someone else's property, even if they had been slave owners, was not exactly constitutional. So, the landowners and planters are going to use several things to control the population of the freedmen and to some degree poor whites. They're going to implement sharecropping contracts. This is an idea where they say you work the land. I have land on there twice, sorry. They're going to say you work the land and share in the profit. It's a nice idea, but they eventually take that idea and twist it. So it's kind of like you help bring in the crop and we'll split the profit. Then the next thing they come up with is tenant farming, which is a step up from sharecropping. In this case, you actually own the land that you work on, but you're going to pay the landowner, the planter, rent for a house on the land. Another thing that's not often talked about in textbooks is penal farms. This comes along a little later, and this doesn't happen everywhere in the South, but it happens in too many places. And the idea is basically create a huge prison system, create very strict laws that are not fairly administered, and these laws will then incarcerate many of the poor blacks in the South, and there they can use them as free labor while they're locked up. The black codes go a long ways to helping with this. These codes were separate on the constitutional laws that prohibited blacks from exercising freedom, property ownership, intermarriage, and things like lawsuits. And then, of course, the other thing was the Klan. And they terrorized or attacked anyone who challenged the racist laws. This would include whites as well. Any whites that attempted to help the freedmen would be subject to the same terrorist acts. Okay, this is a pretty good diagram of the sharecropper cycle of poverty. One of the things I want you to figure out today is why sharecropping led to poverty. What is it about it that trapped anyone involved in this cycle? Some famous people like Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash, and I think, of course, the great Johnny Paycheck, I think they all came from sharecropping families. So look through this and figure out what it is, how it is set up that the people involved in it get trapped. Okay. You're wondering, what is that music? It's not Harry Styles. Terrifying, isn't it? That there's actually some music involved. If you listen to that song, you hear a strong rhythm to it, and you hear the sound of tools being used in a cadence. These were songs that were used to keep prisoners working at the same time, often swinging an axe to take down a big tree as they cleared out places like river bottoms, and they were used in the prison system to help the workers, help the inmates keep time so that they would not get in trouble. Okay, let's wrap this up. The period of Reconstruction ends in 1877 when Rutherford Hayes gets elected, and the Republicans, agree to remove the military from the South. And after Hayes, the Democrats slowly resurface and take control. So the 13th Amendment ends slavery, but sharecropping and tenant farming are going to replace it. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship, equal citizenship, but the southern states use a form of popular sovereignty to pass black codes which deny that citizenship, and that citizenship will be denied well into the 60s, and that's what the civil rights movement is about, and that's what brings an end to that. Finally, the 15th Amendment guarantees no discrimination, but Reconstruction fails ultimately. The Republicans withdraw troops, they fail to support the Freedmen's Bureau, and the Democrats return to power in the South. And that might mean that, you would think because of Democrats that they saved everything, but at this time they do not. It doesn't work like that. So that's the end of our exciting presentation. I hope you learned something, and have fun.